into any bar this weekend and watch a football game and see how many black guy, white guy, Asian guy, Hispanic guy you see sitting together. You won't see that. Even though from the ghetto, you don't know you're in the ghetto because you never leave the ghetto, and you don't know how people live. So you live in people around you. That's all you know. So that's it. Now you would know, being in different places, et cetera, et cetera. We didn't have TV like we have now, which we only have 600 channels. That's all, nothing serious. In those days, we had like 2.5 channels. And everybody watched the same thing. We watched Huntley Brinkley, we watched Walter Cronkite, and we watched Ed Sullivan. And that was it. That was TV. But now there's just a billion shows, and people see how people live. You can always watch the Kardashians or something. Well, Godfrey Cambridge, who a lot of people don't remember Godfrey Cambridge, but he was, to me, the funniest guy at the time. Of course, Cosby was strong and big at the time, Alan King, and then as you grew older, you watched Flip Wilson, and then working the Chitlin circuit, as we used to call it, which is the all-black circuit. You watch Red Fox, Moms Mabley, Timmy Rogers, all those people, Pigmeat Markham, so you saw those people. I was in the SEEK program, Search for Education, Evaluation, and Knowledge in New York City, which they had a lot of liberal people that were teaching kids to feel good, the Kennedys, all those kind of people like that we had around. Calvin Trillin's wife, Atlas Trillin, all those people who wanted to feel good about themselves because they were already multi-billionaires, just feel better to teach little ghetto kids. I think I first started in oral interpretation class, and I was a big fan of Dick Gregory. And Dick Gregory had probably the first book that I ever read, and this was like when I was 18 years old. I had gotten through the New York City school systems fairly easily without any book reading or math learning or anything, even though I didn't graduate, but I was through. Thank you. And the first book I ever read was Dick Gregory's first book, which is called Nigger, and that's his book. And that inspired me to try to go on, plus watching Godfrey Cambridge on the Merv Griffin show. So between those two things, I put together a little kind of cumulation or mix of all the acts and had something of a minor 5 minutes. Well, the first place I took it was to the Club Baron. The Club Baron, the East Wind, where I worked with a group called the Last Poets. And then I worked with the Black Panthers for like 2 years. So that was during the time of the unrest in '67, '68, where a lot of civil rights things were going on. So that's when I first started, and I worked with those guys, the Panthers, Stokely Carmichael, H. Rap Brown, all those people for a long time. That was 2 years, and we did a lot of shows for free up and down the East Coast. I was in radio also at the time, working as an engineer at the wonderful QXR, WMCA, and WRVR. So I was the first black guy in that thing, because they hadn't hired black people to work in New York City downtown, because in those days, CHR radio and network TV were all white. There was no black people. And what happened was there was a movement afoot to get black people in that area. Now there's too many people of everything. We got Asians, we got Hispanics, we got blacks, we got people from Neptune. I don't know where these people are from. We got models, that's the Fox network. They got all the models working there. But the models they do have PhDs and they do have degrees, so I can't take that away from them. I have nothing, I have bupkis. But these people in those days, the first guy I remember being hired was Bob Teague. He worked at the O&O and at NBC. And then the black people protested so much, they wanted so many people, that ABC, the radio station, hired Chuck Leonard. And at those days, regional accent was not allowed. Now you could have any accent you want, they don't care. And Chuck Leonard was a highly well-spoken black guy who did radio, and the black people protested because they said, he doesn't sound black enough. He doesn't sound black. So they didn't realize we had him and a guy named Roscoe, who was the coolest guy. He would read Gabron on the air. He was the coolest guy, and they hated him because he lived back and forth in France, and he was married to a white chick. And so was Chuck Leonard. So they hated both of those guys, but those are the first two guys. And we had R&B stations only for black people, and Frankie Crocker was our biggest guy there. And he came eventually downtown, but they didn't like him because he was too black and too ridiculous and whatever, because he had that whole thing going with the black thing, and they didn't want to get nervous. So in those days, hiring black people was a whole different deal. So I got in under that banner. You know, and in QXR, the station and radio station, the New York Times, they really wanted black people. So they were scouring the street, you know, for black people to work in any capacity other than janitorial, to say, hey, you know, we got, you know, Schlesinger and all those guys wanted, come on, let's get some black people in here. And then R. Peter Strauss from MCA wanted black people. R. Peter Strauss was our owner at MCA, who, amazingly as it sounds, is also the father-in-law of Monica Lewinsky now. Hello! So he was a great guy to work for. I loved working for R. Peter Strauss. He was great. And they wrote the show as a black family in the ghetto, poor, struggling with, I guess they say, tremendous values and all that kind of jazz. And when I got on the show, being a raw comic, because I'm just a road comic, that's all I've been, that's all, I'll die as a road comic. Many have already seen my act and said I've died already, but that's a whole nother story. But I came on to be funny. That was my plan of attack. You know, I never really thought about being on a sitcom. It never even crossed my mind. My goal was to get on the Johnny Carson show. There was no other goal that I had. Let's get on Johnny Carson. If this will get me on Johnny Carson, I'm good. So when I did the show, I said, I'm going to be as funny as when I come out, I want nuclear bomb comedy. And I don't think anybody else on the show, they're actors, so they're thinking we're acting. I came out as a stand-up, different deal. And so I was lucky enough to have a lot of good people around because I worked the Improv and the Comedy Store, knew a lot of comics. So I had a lot of guys give me jokes and help me out with punchlines and stuff like that. And then the crew, which I always say is the most important thing on any stand-up, any sitcom, because the crew at any place has heard every show, every joke, everything. They know it all. They're immune to laughter. They've heard it all. So I would take it in front of the crew and say, is this funny? Is this good? Is that good? Is that good? And the crew helped me out a lot. You know, I had my man Vito, who was on camera 2 or 3 or 4, wherever he was at, and he just said, this doesn't work, this not, and we changed stuff all the time. So I came out to be funny. I don't think anybody else on the show was trying to do that. So I think as you watch a sitcom, and any sitcom you do, someone has to be the guy to take the pie. By that I mean that person has to be the one that you look to for laughs. You'll see it on any show. Where it's I Love Lucy, it was Lucy. Where it was Mary Tyler Moore, it was Ted Knight. Where it was Jerry Seinfeld, it was Michael Richards. You have to have that guy. If everybody is perfect, there is no comedy. And that's where I think people have found the problem in doing comedies nowadays. That's why reality shows are so big, because first of all, no one wants to take the pie because everybody wants to be perfect. Everybody wants to be the great guy. You gotta get messy in comedy. It's gotta be ugly. You gotta take the pie, somebody. And if the person that takes the pie usually is going to surface, because that's where that's where people gravitate. You'll see that with Jaleel White, who played Urkel. You have to have somebody. And if nobody says, I'm willing to be funny, then there's no funny. And that's it. And that's really what happened. I was the guy willing to do it, and that's what happened. You know, Happy Days with Henry Winkler, same thing. You have to have that guy or girl. You know, you see it on Mike and Molly with the young lady that's on that show. She's one willing to take the pie. If everybody's perfect, there is no joke. So get over it, people. I'm a believer that if the guy who's working on the catering truck has a good line, let's use it. You know, if the guy who's driving the cab has a good line, let's do it. But when you have writers, and we had great writers, led by Alan Mannings, Basil Weisskopf, and Shulman and Baskin, it's a communal activity, and that's what people don't like. That's what you see on shows nowadays. That's why you won't see many shows even taped in front of a live audience, because most of the shows don't work in front of a live audience. There's no laughs. So the people who wrote it said, those people who are listening and watching and judging our show, they know nothing. We know what's funny. And therefore, that's why the laugh tracks are used so predominantly on any minor sitcoms that are on. If the audience doesn't laugh, then it's not funny. The end of it. There's no more discussion. You can have great jokes that you think are great, that you wrote in a room, and that you say, oh, this is a great joke. If no one laughs at it, it's no good. Take it out. And then most staffs don't have the capability of rewriting or doing that kind of stuff. And I was constantly rewriting all the time. Also, I think the fact that Norman Lear, who was our leader and master blaster, also capitulated to the audience. If a joke didn't work, he wouldn't mind saying, we got to do something else. You know, we'll tape it 3 times instead of twice. That's the way you do it. That's the only way to do a show. The audience is the ultimate judge, not the writing staff, not the producers. The audience will tell you what's funny. And then when they don't laugh, it's no good. You can't say the audience stinks, the audience is no good. No, you stink. We had one of our lovely and wonderful directors, John Rich, who had done, oh, heck darn it, The Brady Bunch, The Partridge Family, The Honeymooners, a veteran guy who's been around forever, and not a, what do we call an actor's director. He's a technical guy. He thinks of how can we get laughs, how can we do things. And I did the little Dy-no-mite thing in rehearsal one time, and he says, hey, I like that. And I didn't even do a big one. I said, you like what? He said, I like that Dy-no-mite thing. And he says, okay. And he set up an ISO cam on me. And he says, I want you to do it like this. And it was just an acting of how I actually did it, and you know, later on. And I said, well, what do I do? Just do it like that? He says, yeah. And I went, John, that's a little silly. That's just to have somebody stand up and say Dy-no-mite in the middle of a show. He says, this thing is going to be big. And I said, really? He said, yes. And we started it like on the 2nd or 3rd show of the year or whatever. And it just took off. Now, Norman Lear hated it, because it would interrupt the show. And Norman had a thing of like, let's have a show about whatever the issue was. Norman's a big issues-oriented guy. And so in the middle of every show, we'd have to, it's almost like Michael Buffer's thing of let's get ready to rumble. When he's building up to it, everybody knows what's coming, and everybody's waiting for it. And that's what happened with that. And it became huge, and Norman, I think to this day, still regrets it, still would love to have it out, still would, you know, me and Norman as friends, as people, we get along incredibly well. As talent, I don't think Norman Lear agrees with anything that I've ever done, anything that I've ever said. He doesn't understand why people laughed at me. He doesn't get it. He doesn't believe in it. He's not with it. It just was not his thing. And I think that Norman felt that his show was hijacked to his idea of what he wanted to do. And I think to this day, he still regrets that. And I think in terms of my talent, as a person, he likes me. As a talent, I don't think he thinks I have any talent.
What do you mean?
He thinks I have no talent. He doesn't get it. He doesn't understand why people are laughing. Just doesn't work for him. Just not what he does. You know, and we get along great. I love Norman Lear. He's like my uncle. He's the greatest guy in the world, but he just doesn't believe in what I do.
Despite the character's huge breakout.
That's not the way Norman Lear works. That's not the way he works. Norman would rather have pulled the show and brought in somebody else and done the show he wanted to do. And a perfect example is, we were talking about Family Matters. And I think Family Matters, which is Jaleel White and those guys, was going into its 8th year. And Norman was doing 704 Hauser Street, which is another one of his shows that he believes in every one of his shows, but he really believed in his show. And I was sitting in his office and said, hey, Norman, look at this. Because he hadn't had a show on the air in a little while. And I said, look at this, Family Matters is 8 years. Boy, I bet you wish you would have produced that show. And he looked at me straight. He said, I would never do a show like that, ever, ever. And that's the way Norman feels. He just has to have his issue stuff, and that's the way he works. Well, the deal is I'm a comic, you know, and the conversation and watching the show and all that, I came in and do a gig, and working at the store and the Improv really helped because I was around my guys all the time. And people, if you're a comic, I think people find this hard to believe. There's always going to be people who hate you. Just hate you. And you can pick out whoever your favorite comic in the world is, and somebody will tell you they suck. I don't care who your guy is. It isn't like music. If you listen to Aretha Franklin, even if you're just a hardcore Buck Owens fan, you have to say, she can sing. You know, not the way I like it, but, you know, Aretha Franklin can sing. As a comic, people are just, I mean, you get, nowadays that we have the internet and blogs, you can see about Dane Cook, Kevin Hart, whoever it may be, and these guys are drawing a lot of people. Larry the Cable Guy, Lisa Lampanelli. People, they savage these people, you know, and I'm just a low-lying road comic, and even I get savaged. I mean, so you just have to be ready for constant pressure and working, doing probably 400 or 500 shows a year. You're just used to it. Just people always think you suck, you know. So I'm not. It's not a big deal to me. You know, I'm just used to that people just hate you. That's it. You got to do comedy. See, people nowadays don't want to do comedy. People want to be cool. People want to have their hair right, the right outfit. You got to commit. You got to, snot's got to come out your nose. Your eyes got to water. You got to have hands flapping. You got to, everybody wants to be the cool Billy D. Williams, Denzel Washington. The cool guys will never be funny. And especially in ethnic comedy, you know, nowadays, you know, everybody is trying to be, you watch the girls and the guys. Nowadays, there's just no funky comedy on. Nobody wants to do it because of images, et cetera, et cetera. See, our show, the way Norman wrote it, was the first show where you had a poor black family in a comedy, in a sitcom, and people had to fight for whatever, the money and this and that almost the way it is now in the country, but never mind about that. And the black people and the ethnic people complained so much that from whenever our show went off, you will have never seen a poor black family ever again on TV. Ever. And you'll never see them again. And every family is perfect now. The hair is right. Everybody's got money coming in. It's all good. There's no issues being attacked. There's only love issues, which, you know, I'm a big relationship non-believer anyway, so that's a whole nother story. But you'll never see another poor black family again. I always tell the story, Norman Lear, at the time there were no black writers in Hollywood, very few. Very, very few. And Norman did more for black writing, black behind the scenes, black behind whatever, producers, directors, associates, hair girls, makeup people, writers, grips, whatever. He did more for that than anybody. Cosby will be second, in my opinion, to doing that kind of stuff. And he went to all the black colleges, which is probably about, I guess, 75 of them, and said, if you write, because black people at that time didn't know you could make a living writing. You know, they knew about Langston Hughes, but they didn't know about Woody Allen and Mel Brooks, those type of guys who make a very good living writing and even acting, or people behind the scenes who just write, you know. So he said, if you can write my shows, please send in a script and write it. So a guy named Michael Moy from North Carolina A&T wrote one of our shows, sent it in. And for anybody who knows anything about shooting shows, the script was so good, they shot the show as is, the way it came in. No changes, no nothing. Michael Moy flew to Los Angeles with his chicken bag and whatever. He'd never been on a plane, nothing like that. And they hired him right there on the spot. Michael Moy turned into one of these incredible writers. He's a sensational, unbelievable comedy writer. Now, after our show was canceled, he was hired immediately for other shows. He did Fame, and he did Silver Spoons, and he did the Gary Coleman thing or whatever. When The Cosby Show came on 10 years later, the guys over at Fox said, this is just too saccharine and too sweet. We need to write a show to counter this show. So they hired Michael Moy to write the show. He wrote a show that was so unbelievable. People said, this is the funniest show we have ever seen. But the guys over at Fox said, we can't do the show because the black people would go insane. They would come down and burn down the studio. So they just put the show on hold. When that crew got fired, the next crew came in and they read the script and they said, oh my darn heck. What a great, incredible, insane clown show this is. This is unbelievable. And they said, we can't do it. Black people, they would kill us on the spot. And somebody in the room said, well, why don't we do it as white people? Somebody said, oh, okay. And they did. Married with Children. Now, if that had been a black show, all hell would have broke loose. And that's where the black people, even though we do have right now the Tyler Perry franchise going, that's where black people have eliminated themselves from being in contention for any kind of roles, any kind of thing, any kind of stuff. That's why, other than the Tyler Perry franchise, you see no black product. And you're not going to see any ethnic product, whether it be Hispanic, Chinese, whatever, because the problems outweigh the positive, because there's going to be so much complaining about everything, and it's constant. It never stops. Let a project roll, whether you're in it or not. No attacking Tyler Perry. Let him do his thing. But there's people attacking Tyler Perry, black people attacking Tyler Perry. Any kind of black sitcom that comes on, there won't be any. ABC, CBS, Fox, CW, not involved at all. Everybody has their obligatory minority now. It's getting to a point now, you go, we can't even put a black person in a show. Let's get an Asian person. That way, we don't have to worry about any heat. And then you see the black people in dramas. You know, you see them in all the CSI, Bruckheimer hires, you know, his obligatory black person or two, and that's it. And if you notice, every black person in the show is the head of the lab, the president of the college, the this, the that. There's no, like, just an average black guy or girl. Everybody's the head of the police station, the main cat. You know, you got to report to the main man. You know, 24 was the same way. The main man was the prez, because they don't want any heat. So it's too much, I think, now to hire minorities. I wouldn't, because I don't want the heat. Sitcoms now are really pablum and just about, oh, is she involved in how the kids and how we're going to, who's teaching the kids? It's very stuff going on. Nobody wants to do something. And like I said, everybody's got a great job. There are no money problems in any black or Hispanic sitcoms. Everybody's doing great. They're, you know, real life, you hear people protesting all the time. You got this Occupy America thing. Everybody's saying there's no money, but in terms of getting money to minority communities, you would say, well, why? Every time I watch a sitcom, they're rich. You know, they're doctors, they're lawyers. Why am I giving money to black people? They're doing great. Because people are fighting for their own survival. You know, I've always said this. The reality of our society is that we're probably the most splintered we've ever been right now. There's 600 channels on TV, and there's something for everybody. So if you were a black person that didn't like white people, there's 3 or 4 networks for you just to watch black stuff with news. If you're a Hispanic person, you can watch Univision, Galavision, Telemundo, and you could live just in that society if you want to. We are probably the most splintered country right now. Nobody knows anything about anybody else and cares not to. I've always said this. Other than interracial physical relationships, go into any bar this weekend and watch a football game and see how many black guy, white guy, Asian guy, Hispanic guy you see sitting together. You won't see that. You watch black girl, white girl, Hispanic girl going to whomever's concert, a Dave Matthews concert or a Jay-Z concert. You won't see that. You can grab anybody in the lobby here and say, could you call a person of the opposite race right now and say, we're getting together on Sunday, let's all hang out. Now, let me say this, everybody works together, but they don't hang together. And on Monday, when the football game is finished, everybody can talk about the football game, but did you watch the football game with that person? No. We're not together. Other than interracial relationships, because, you know, guys, we're all sleazeballs and we go after anything we can get. But it's that kind of deal like that. So I think our society is becoming more and more splintered, more and more angry, and we're in class warfare and we're in race warfare right now. That's just my opinion. Keeping things up and happy. I think that at this stage, that's the way it goes. That's just the way it is, because I've said this before. I'm not sure the racists belong together. You know, they've done as everything they could have done. Plessy versus Ferguson, which is separate but equal, may be the way to go, because they've passed tons of bills from the Civil Rights Act in '64 to on and on and on, and people are still fighting it. I mean, people are still battling. That's why we have Black History Month. That's why we have Puerto Rican Day. It's just for those people. And people, you know, I think white people are being left out, let me say this, and they've taken the most heat, because just in comedy, allegedly, my field, allegedly, if you watch Def Jam and a white person goes to Def Jam and sits in the front row, they're going to take heat. Tons and tons of heat from the black comics that are on stage. They're going to take a ton of heat. Now, let's say you go to a Jeff Foxworthy concert and there's a black person there. There will be no talk to the black person. There will be nothing at all, because that's politically incorrect. You can't do it. You cannot do it. But you'll see it on HBO, Def Jam, any black comic that's on there. That's why when Laura Schlesinger, Dr. Laura, did what she did and mentioned the N-word on her show, I didn't have a problem with it, because she said she had seen the black comics on HBO do it. And she's exactly right. She's seen them. I mean, I don't think there's a black comic who works on HBO that doesn't use it. Maybe I'm wrong. So let me say 8.5 out of 10 black comics on HBO use the word. The Good Times days, we had people that used it. You know, Richard all the time. Richard Pryor used it all the time. Paul Mooney, probably one of the legends of comedy, just ask him. And I think that you see so many more people using it now. So people feel really much more available to it. But I think that in reality, most people really don't care about the other race at all. You know, I don't think blacks, you know, blacks, American blacks are different than Asian blacks or Haitian blacks or African blacks. And African blacks think they're better than American blacks. And Haitian blacks think they're better than African blacks. The same thing with white people. Jewish people, they're battling with Italian people. Italian people, they're battling with Polish people. The German people, they hate Polish people. It just goes on and on. And I think we just have to kind of accept this. I don't mind that people bring up the fact that we shouldn't do it, but I don't have a problem that they do it, because we've been talking about this thing for 250 years. They've passed bills, they've fought wars, and still the hatred is more than ever. Just my opinion. Television influenced us, but then again, what were we talking about? Black sitcoms. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about George Lopez, Hispanic sitcoms. That's what we talk about. That's the way it works. If you look at the show, say Mike and Molly, they have the one black cop on the show. Boom, the end of it. Thank you, we're covered. You know, that's the way it goes. That, I mean, I'm not saying anything bad about Chuck Lorre. It's just that obligatorily, I don't know if that's a word, you have to have a minority. You know, it's just, but it doesn't no longer have to be black. It could be an Asian guy. You know, the Big Bang Theory, no black people on the show. Saying that black people don't go into outer space, I guess we're not there. The reality of our show, and people, I find this always hard to believe, none of us really spoke to each other. I mean, literally from the first day, we never said one word to each other. Everybody would have their different corners of the room, and that was that. So people ask me about that, but there was no relationship with those people. I don't really know those people. I wish them all the best, and that's that. You know, we only met really literally in the center of the bullpen, as they used to call it. We would meet right in there, and everybody had their own little space, you know, and that was that. The thing that I do admire about our cast is that we were very professional, because everybody came out and we looked like a family. But I couldn't tell you that I've ever called anybody on this show or they've called me. I don't think it's negative at all. I think it's a funny thing. You know, that's the thing. When you look at characters that I would base or see myself doing, which would be Ed Norton or Art Carney, or even Michael Richards, who was after me, but that's just a crazy, wild guy. Fun guy, never had a problem, you know, with gangs or any of that kind of jazz. Good guy, but just a funny cat, you know, and that's it. And that's my kind of funny. You know, Bill Daly on the Newhart show, just a funny, wild guy. He had a very responsible position in flying planes. I was a responsible guy. You know, it's that kind of deal like that. So when you have a character like that, you have to watch out for that kind of guy. Same thing with Jaleel White. Jaleel White was a guy who went to school and did whatever he did, and he was a good guy. But he was just happened to be, you know, a little kooky. I felt no responsibility to anybody ever, except for to myself and to my comedic genes, to be as funny as possible for the 22 minutes that we were on, and maybe the 6 minutes that I got in the show. Because what a lot of people don't realize is that after the second year, because of whatever problems we may have had, I basically worked alone or with guests. So they brought in people to write monologues for me because they realized that I was a comedian. So I took my own timing. There was some interaction with the cast, but not as much after the first or second year. Black people have never told the truth in terms of even comedy. You know, black people will be the first ones to stand up, or Hispanic people, minorities, will be the first one to stand up and say, we believe in God and this and that's our deal. But who do they support? They support Cat Williams. They support Dave Chappelle. All good comics. There's nothing wrong with what they do. But they support the dirtiest, the filthiest, the smut-raking comics that they can. And I'm not saying that these guys are bad. I love Dave Chappelle and I love Cat Williams. But if the black people protested the way they did about sitcoms, then Cat Williams would have to change his style, then Dave Chappelle would have to change his style, and that's the thing that white people see, because the networks are trying to make money in terms of Comedy Central and HBO. They throw those things out there because black people support them. And then white people go, well, okay, then that's black people in terms of those kind of guys. The people they support, Lil Wayne, all these rapper guys, the dirtiest, filthiest language, the most misogynistic stuff, hatred of women, what they're gonna do, using the B, the N, all sorts of words about black women, black kids, this and that. Maury Povich has made a living for 22 years running black people out with who's the daddy baby or the baby daddy or whatever they are. He's made a living. The majority of those people are black. That's what happens. So I would love for a nice cleansing session of black people who stand up so heavily for the Lord to say, you know what, Dave Chappelle and Cat Williams and all these other cats, we're not going to be with them because that's not what we do. I have no problem with that because I'm a leader of the anti-movement of that, because I'm as low as you can possibly go. There's no problem. But we have lost that. But we still try to talk about it, but that's not us anymore. The majority of kids are being raised by a single parent. whether it's a mom, a grandma, aunt, uncle, whatever it is. Let's start getting to this part of our society, which is the real part of our society. We don't have families like Ozzie and Harriet. We don't have these families like you see on these sitcoms on TBS and TNN. That's no longer existing. And you know what? It's never coming back. You know, our athletes, our actresses, our actors, they're having kids out of wedlock. They don't even care. I just saw where Rod Stewart's daughter had a kid with Vittorio, Benicio Vittorio, whatever his name is. And she said, oh, no, we're not together. We just slept together a couple of times, and I had a kid. That's it. That's really the way people think now. I have no problem with that, but let's not walk around going with this great righteous society. That's our normal behavior now. Everybody slow down. Everybody would say sitcom comedy is different than stand-up comedy. It's not as hard in terms of trying to get the big laugh. You're working in a team concept, whereas things you do in a sitcom comedy jokes, you would never do on stage because people would probably boo you off stage. So the jokes are much softer in sitcoms. You got to really come hard on the stand-up level. Just a different reality, different thing. And it's actually more relaxing because the pressure is not on. You know, when you're a stand-up and you got, from my standpoint, 150 people, from Steve Martin's standpoint, 50,000 people, you can see people that are just going, man, no good. But then when you do a sitcom, you know, they'll put a laugh in, it's all right. You can say, hey, that guy didn't give me the right setup line, whatever, whatever. But when you're out there alone, oh my heck darn it, you can hear it. I mean, and you hear it through silence. You know, you do a joke and people just go, and you go, uh-oh, that didn't work. So you have, but the thing is, you always have to make it look like you know what you were doing. You can't go like, oh, it didn't work. You have to go like, oh yeah, and you have to just keep moving like you know what you're talking about. In a sitcom, you have to keep acting, but you know there's going to be a laugh there. In a stand-up, there will be no laugh there, and it will be an empty spot. And the only guys you will hear laughing at a joke that doesn't work are the comics in the back of the room. And they'll be laughing because they know you're acting. They go, ha, that didn't work. I think Seinfeld's comedy fit for him, what he is and what he does, and it's a softer kind of thing. It's closer to what he does. The rest of the people, I know it may sound strange to the people in the acting community, but I think the other 3 or 4 really had to do a little acting. You know, I think, I know they won't believe it. They don't believe that comics can do whatever. Billy Goodell, I think he's doing a little acting because that's not, you know, it's part of him, but not all of him. I'm going to do my bit and get as much laughs as I can. And what we would have sometimes, if we would have a moment, and Norman Lear would always say, well, didn't that moment feel much better than that tomfoolery you're always doing? And I would go, no, that's it. I'm here for laughs. If you need a laugh, let me bring it. I'm coming in on the big Boeing 707. I'm trying to kill, man. You know, for me as a comic, and this is going to sound terrible, you want people in the audience to fall out and have heart attacks or strokes. I know I've had 3 heart attacks in my crowd and 2 heat exhaustions. So, and that's throughout the years. But you remember that when somebody has a heart attack, you go, all right, man. It sounds horrible, but it's really like, yeah, that's how good I was. So that's just me. I don't think anybody ever stops doing stand-up that is a stand-up. You know, Michael Keaton was a stand-up. He hated stand-up and never went back to it. On a smaller scale, Michael Richards was a stand-up. He hated doing stand-up. He had to go back to stand-up because the work was no longer there as an actor. And then now, with the situation that occurred, he won't be around anymore. But most people who are doing sitcoms, it's such a tight thing in terms of a sitcom. So many people have so much to say about what you're doing. Whereas a stand-up, that's you. Whatever you say, that's what you said, and that's it. Whatever it may be, that's the way it goes. I had David Letterman wrote for me. I had Jay Leno that wrote for me. I have Steve Odekirk who did Jimmy Neutron. I also had Louis Anderson who wrote for me. I had Robert Schimmel who wrote for me. I had Larry Charles wrote for me. I had a lot of guys write for me. I was very, very fortunate. You know, Rich Jenny wrote for me. I think there's a lot of comedy around. The industry is of the belief, no matter how great a script, a joke, whatever it may be, they'll always say, well, what has he done? I don't care what he's done. He did this just as good. That's it. And nobody listens to guys like that, you know, when they're first starting out. Nobody pays attention. I'm the guy that you meet on your first entry into showbiz. I listen to them. I'm the guy who would do that. And then, thank goodness, everybody, you know, went on to do whatever they do. You know, all my guys are doing great. I'm very proud of that. You know, Leno and Letterman, they're rolling. And they were, you know, they were with me for a long time, you know, almost 10 years apiece for both of them. And, you know, I go through the trials and tribulations with them. You know, the two guys, Jeff Stein and Frank Duncan, who wrote on Barney Miller and created Mr. Belvedere. Some people don't want to hear Mr. Belvedere in their credits, but nevertheless, they did it. And those guys with me for almost 12 years. Larry Jacobson, who writes for Jay Leno now, he did All in the Family, and he did, not All in the Family, but he did Married with Children and the David Letterman Show. Wayne Klein, who did both Jay Leno and David Letterman. Those guys can write, man. And industry-wise, they don't want those kind of guys. They want guys who are relying on the industry to be feeling like we did it for these guys. There's a lot of guys. If you go to any comedy club, from the Ha Ha Hut to the Improv to the Store to the Comedy and Magic, there's guys just standing around and have so much talent that will never get through. There's a lot of talent that will never, ever get through because of just the general minutia of the industry. And that's too bad, because there's a lot of good guys. So I was a guy who eliminated the minutia and just talked to everybody. This comedy, you know, it used to be, I think Mel Brooks said it, he says, funny is funny. That's not true anymore. Funny is not funny anymore. Funny is, you got your gay comedy, you got your hardcore dyke comedy, you got your black ghetto comedy. It's just not for everybody. Just comedy's not for everybody anymore. I think that Flip Wilson was safe, didn't bother anybody. And today's community, if there's been a Flip Wilson, he'd be considered Uncle Tom. Not for me. I like Flip Wilson. I like what he did. I think he was funny in what he did. I think he, you know, maybe not the most innovative guy, but he put it in a good package that worked. I think that Flip Wilson just brought a safe, nice, easygoing kind of comedy, just funny stuff. You know, it wasn't the kind of thing that would work today, though. It's an era piece. And the thing that Flip did that was interesting, not only producing his own shows and having the rights to his own shows, is when his minute of fame, or whatever you want to call it, 15 minutes, he left. He didn't try to hang on. He was just gone. He took his money and ran, man. And he had like 15 years of just hanging out. That was very interesting. That's an interesting move. Most of us can't do that. Too much ego for most of us. That's the only reason you do it. It's orgasmic. It's what drives you. You know, when, you know, people come up to you and the things they'll always say, we grew up with you. We loved it. I do all clean comedy. People say, we appreciate it. We love you so much. We never go out, but we made an effort to get out, and we appreciate that it was clean, and we appreciate that you talked to us, and we appreciate that you were here in our little town, because I don't work the big towns anymore. I'm out of that. My mother killed me with a line. She actually said this. I was going to Altoona, Pennsylvania to work the Holiday Inn on the freeway there, and I was saying to her, I said, I'm working the Holiday Inn in Altoona, Pennsylvania. My mother said to me, she said, well, you know, your time for the big markets is up. You had that. You did that in the old days, but now you're old and you're out of style, and there's going to be people in the smaller towns who haven't seen you, so you can play those smaller towns, and that's where you belong. Thanks, Mom. Glad you're with me. Hi. I've accepted the way what my reality is. I'm not standing here going, oh boy, I'm going to be right there with those big guys, you know, the Kevin Hart. I'm not going to be a big guy, but at my level, I'm going to be the best guy that I can. Freddie was one of these guys, and we all have friends like this, that can be a complete moron, but you still like him. He was the most lovable, great guy, terse, crazy, great personality. What happened to Freddie was he was enabled by the studios, by his agents, by his managers. The same thing happened with Richard Pryor, enabled. And because of the heavy drug usage, it took a lot away from what Freddie was like. Freddie was a great guy, but he just negated himself with the drugs. The same thing happened to Richard. You know, those guys were great womanizers. They had tons of women, tons of drugs, tons of talent, and people enabled them on all levels. And that's what took the talent of Freddie and Richard. You know, Richard may have not, in my opinion, been the most talented guy, but he had a lot of people, Paul Mooney especially. Paul Mooney made Richard Pryor. He made him happen because Richard, in my opinion, was physically unable to function. He was that high on drugs constantly. But Paul Mooney made him what he was by putting his stuff together, getting him in condition to go on stage, making him perform every night, helping him write his stuff and put it in order. Freddie, his act had kind of deteriorated because he was just having too much fun, man. Too much fun. And he was not able to focus. You know, when we left New York, David Brenner was his muse. David Brenner was the guy who kept them together. David Brenner hates L.A., never came to L.A., and that's when Freddie deteriorated. That's when everything went wrong. Freddie, I don't know what he would be today because I think Freddie would have died one way or the other, you know, and that's just the way he was. He wasn't a very focused cat, man. He really wasn't, and I love the guy. He's one of my dear friends, and we had fights and rumbles all the time about everything. But I loved the guy. He was a great guy, great personality, funny, sweet, but those drugs, man, yikes. Let me tell you something. Freddie Prinze was as Latino as Lars Birkenbuker, who you don't know who that is, but that's a Swedish guy. Freddie had nothing to do with Latinos. He used it as whatever. That was he was as Asian as Hispanic as Rush Limbaugh. He had nothing to do with Hispanics at all. But he caught a hook and he used it. That was it. He had nothing to do with the Hispanic thing. Freddie was whiter than Whitey Herzog. He was nothing to do with that. Trust me, no.
Honeymooners a lot.
Honeymooners, my favorite. That to me is real mono comedy. No props, no sets, one-on-one, 2-camera, 3-camera, mono, Art Carney and Jackie Gleason, baby. And we just went with lines and acting and going and doing, and that's the way you do comedy, man. Nowadays, you got the props and the hair and nothing. Nobody changed outfits, nothing. If you notice, no change. He was in his bus driver outfit, and Art Carney was in his hat and his vest, and we went for it, man. It was all words and acting. That's real comedy to me. Art Carney was my acting comedic idol. He's the guy who did such good stuff, man. It was great. If you watch him, even if you single him out and just put him on ISO, you just go, wow, this is stuff here, man. Lucy worked real hard, man. She, again, threw herself into what she was doing, whether it be eating the pong-pongs or drinking the whatever, the cough medicine thing. She threw herself into it. She worked real hard in terms of her character development and what she did within the show, because she was a wife who accepted being a wife. Can't do that nowadays. Nobody wants to be a wife anymore. Those days are over. And then when it was time to play the character within the structure of the wife, she always played the wacky, crazy thing. And she took the pie, literally. Because I think you do need some rehearsal. You know, with Norman, it was interesting with Norman Lear. We rehearsed to the point of nauseum, where I just went, enough is enough. But you know what? After being on other sitcoms as a guest, it's not enough because we didn't rehearse, and the sitcoms, you know, were maybe not as good as they could have been, and we were not honest about audience laughs or crew laughs. And Norman was honest, where you could say, this is just not going to work, this line or this page or this whatever it was, and we would fix it up. With other shows, they just go, don't worry, it's going to be fine. We'll grab it in post. It'll be great. We'll get it. Don't worry. It's never don't worry. You know going in, you don't have it. Don't do it. Doesn't work. You know, so let's have some feel with it. You know, let's do it. Let's make it right. It takes a lot of work to do a sitcom, man. A sitcom is a 12 to 15-hour-a-day gig for the writers and the actors. It's a 10-minute-a-day job for wardrobe and makeup. Don't need them. I'm not worried about them. Let's get the writers in here and let's make it happen. That's my belief. We had great professional actors and actresses. The cats were working hard. You know, they were young guys who wrote the show, and they really wanted to be successful, and they want the show to be successful, so they worked real hard. I love our writers, Shulman and Baskin and Baser, Weisskopf, and Alan Manning. Those guys were great. I loved them. And the fact that, this is shocking, Norman Lear was actively involved in all of our shows. And the fact that he had like 8, 9, 10 shows on, including All in the Family, which at that time was a water cooler show like The Sopranos and Seinfeld and all that kind of stuff like that, he still knew what was happening on our show. You know, I was lucky enough to work with Aaron Spelling. And Aaron was the complete opposite of Norman Lear. He was volleying, always trying to get different times together and be able to dominate a network like he did for ABC, to have 7 to 11 all Aaron Spelling, and to have what he felt were the best looking actresses and actors in his show. Norman Lear never thought about that. He wanted his shows to be relevant. That's what he thought about. That's really what he did. You know, he was a great guy, even though he didn't like what I did. But I love Norman Lear. He's the best. We're completely opposite. We're completely opposite. We did, you know, when Norman would say, hey, he's like a gold member or a platinum member of the NAACP or something like that. Said, I'm going to the NAACP thing, you should go. And hey, I said, I don't believe in the NAACP. I'm not with him. I said, I think it's an outdated institution. I'm done. He says, what are you talking about? They did this, that, and that. And he goes back to the Thurgood Marshall and Charlie White and all those guys like that. I said, no, I'm not in. I'm out. And he would get a little perturbed and leave. But he was always had all those things, accepting awards, donating money, this and that. And when he would donate money in my name to NAACP, I said, don't do that. Don't donate money in my name. Put something else. Go to multiple sclerosis or cancer or something else. Do not put me in there. So I was never a big NAACP guy. I think a lot of people have made America laugh, which is good, because we need laughter. Laughter is always good on any level. But the reality is, you know where you are by what you're doing at the moment. We work a lot of clubs, small clubs. That's what we do. We are fighting for gigs like everybody else. It's always a battle, you know. We know that this is where we are, you know, and that's the way it goes. Stand-up is immediate gratification. You go in, you got your 5 or 6 lines you came up with that day, and you take a shot and you see what happens. You know, some people just don't dig that, and you have to meet people too, you know, because after the show you're going to meet people. A lot of comics don't like people, and they don't want to meet people, and they don't want to have to talk to people after the show and shake hands with club owners and have the club owner go, oh, well, we didn't draw as well. And a lot of comics just hate it. It's just tough, and you just have to be ready for it. I mean, Seinfeld, thank goodness for him, is dealing on a different level. You know, he's at Caesars, and he's dealing with big 3,000 crowds. Me, you know, working Altoona in front of 110 people, that's a different thing. With a waitress right in front of you while you're on stage, trying to get a check, and somebody going, $26?